What unfolded between Bruce Lee and Gary Elms was not a challenge or a display meant to impress. It was a subtle moment where instruction came without correction and insight arrived without explanation. Bruce Lee allowed the situation to speak for itself, creating space for understanding rather than forcing it. In that quiet exchange, learning happened not through words or repetition but through awareness, timing, and realization that stayed long after the moment ended. The best teachers understand that learning is not something that can be forced on command. When instruction arrives too early, it can interrupt the natural process of discovery. Bruce Lee recognized that understanding grows deeper when it is reached independently. Rather than stepping in immediately, he allowed space for experience to do its work. This patience reflected confidence in the learning process itself. Teaching in this sense became an act of trust. Correction given too soon often replaces curiosity with compliance. When students are stopped mid-process, they may follow instructions without fully grasping why. Bruce Lee saw that premature guidance can limit exploration. By allowing Gary Elms to continue, he preserved the integrity of the moment. The lesson was not handed over, but earned through awareness. That earning made it meaningful. Discovery thrives when learners are allowed to struggle slightly. Struggle sharpens attention and deepens focus. Bruce Lee understood that small moments of uncertainty create fertile ground for insight. By not interfering, he allowed that uncertainty to exist just long enough. The result was clarity that came from experience rather than instruction. Such clarity tends to last. True teaching respects the learner's capacity to think and observe. Bruce Lee did not assume that understanding required constant correction. He trusted that Gary Elms could recognize the lesson once it revealed itself. This respect elevated the learning experience. It transformed the interaction from instruction into realization. Teaching became collaborative rather than directive. Interrupting discovery often satisfies the teacher more than the student. It creates the appearance of guidance without guaranteeing understanding. Bruce Lee avoided this temptation by remaining patient. He allowed the moment to unfold naturally. This restraint shifted responsibility toward the learner. Responsibility in turn strengthened comprehension. Experience teaches in ways explanation cannot. When a lesson is felt rather than told, it integrates more deeply. Bruce Lee relied on this principle by letting events speak. He understood that words can dilute what experience clarifies. By stepping back, he allowed learning to arrive intact. The lesson remained undistorted. Non-interference does not mean absence of guidance. It means choosing the right moment to guide. Bruce Lee's silence was intentional, not passive. He was observing closely, aware of when insight would surface. This awareness allowed him to teach without disrupting the process. Timing became part of the instruction. The learning process often requires space to breathe. Constant correction can suffocate exploration. Bruce Lee created that space by withholding immediate input. In that space, attention sharpened and perception widened. The learner became fully engaged with the moment. Engagement replaced instruction as the primary teacher. Discovery builds confidence because it proves understanding internally. When learners arrive at conclusions themselves, they trust them more deeply. Bruce Lee valued this internal validation. He knew that confidence born from discovery is stable. It does not depend on authority or repetition. It stands on experience. Allowing a moment to unfold also reveals how someone thinks under pressure. Bruce Lee could observe responses without influencing them. This observation provided insight into the learner's instincts and awareness. Such insight is lost when instruction interrupts too soon. Patience preserved authenticity. Authenticity enriched the lesson. Teaching through restraint requires discipline. It demands resisting the urge to control outcomes. Bruce Lee possessed that discipline. He allowed uncertainty to exist because he trusted its value. This trust reflected mastery in teaching as much as in practice. Control gave way to understanding. When discovery is uninterrupted, learning becomes personal. It aligns with the learner's perspective rather than the teacher's explanation. Bruce Lee allowed Gary Elms to encounter the lesson in his own way. This personalization strengthened retention. The lesson became part of the learner's experience. The absence of immediate correction invites reflection. Reflection deepens learning by connecting action to outcome. Bruce Lee's approach encouraged this internal process. Instead of being told what went wrong, the learner recognized it. Recognition fosters growth more effectively than correction alone. True teaching often involves knowing when not to speak. Bruce Lee's silence was deliberate and thoughtful. It demonstrated confidence in both the learner and the process. By not interfering, he allowed understanding to surface naturally. Teaching became an act of timing rather than instruction. The best teachers guide discovery rather than replace it. They recognize that insight gained through experience is more durable than explanation. Bruce Lee embodied this principle by trusting the moment. His restraint allowed learning to unfold fully. In doing so, he taught without interrupting discovery. Understanding that comes from personal realization carries a different weight than understanding that is simply explained. When a lesson is handed over fully formed, it can be accepted without being absorbed. The mind may recognize it, but the experience does not settle deeply. Bruce Lee understood that insight gained through discovery attaches itself to memory and judgment. It becomes part of how someone thinks, not just what they remember. This difference shapes how learning endures. Lessons that are explained often rely on repetition to stay alive. They need reminders, reinforcement, and authority to maintain their place. In contrast, lessons that are discovered feel self-evident once realized. They no longer require justification. Bruce Lee allowed Gary Elms to reach that moment of recognition on his own. That recognition carried certainty because it was earned, not borrowed. Self-realized understanding creates ownership. When someone arrives at a conclusion independently, it feels personal and undeniable. Bruce Lee valued this sense of ownership because it strengthens confidence. The learner no longer depends on the teacher's words to believe the lesson. Belief is grounded in experience. That grounding makes the insight resilient. Borrowed understanding is fragile. It can be questioned or abandoned when pressure arises. Self-realized understanding holds up because it has been tested internally. Bruce Lee's approach ensured that the insight Gary Elms gained would remain intact even without guidance. The lesson did not belong to the teacher anymore, it belonged to the learner. Discovery transforms learning from instruction into realization. Instruction often tells someone what to think. Discovery shows them why it is true. Bruce Lee created conditions where realization became unavoidable. In doing so, he allowed understanding to emerge naturally. This natural emergence made the lesson lasting. When learning becomes personal, motivation changes. The learner is no longer trying to satisfy instruction. Instead, they are responding to insight. Bruce Lee understood that this shift produces deeper engagement. The learner becomes curious rather than compliant. Curiosity sustains learning far longer than obligation. Self-realized lessons integrate more fully with instinct. They influence decision-making automatically. When pressure returns, the insight surfaces without conscious effort. Bruce Lee valued this integration because it made learning functional rather than theoretical. Understanding became part of behavior, not just thought. Explained lessons often feel external. They exist as rules or advice that must be recalled. Discovered lessons feel internal. They exist as understanding that guides action naturally. Bruce Lee ensured that Gary Elms experienced this internalization. The lesson became inseparable from experience. Ownership also increases responsibility. When a learner discovers something themselves, they accept it more fully. There is no authority to defer to or excuse to rely on. Bruce Lee trusted that responsibility would strengthen growth. Responsibility deepens commitment. Self-realization also builds confidence without arrogance. Confidence grows because understanding feels earned. Bruce Lee recognized that this kind of confidence is stable. It does not depend on approval or reinforcement. It remains steady under scrutiny. Learning that lasts often comes from moments of clarity rather than explanation. These moments arrive quietly but leave a strong impression. Bruce Lee allowed such a moment to unfold without interference. The clarity that followed was unmistakable. It stayed because it was felt, not told. Instruction can guide direction, but realization determines depth. Bruce Lee used restraint to allow depth to form. He understood that timing mattered more than explanation. Waiting for realization required patience and trust. That patience paid off in lasting understanding. When understanding is self-realized, it adapts more easily to new situations. The learner knows why it works, not just how. Bruce Lee valued this adaptability. It allowed learning to remain flexible rather than rigid. Insight could evolve without losing its foundation. Discovered lessons also encourage independent thinking. They show the learner that answers can be found through observation and reflection. Bruce Lee wanted to cultivate this independence. It ensured growth would continue beyond the moment. Learning did not end with instruction. Understanding lasts longer when it is self-realized, because it becomes part of one's perspective. Bruce Lee ensured that the insight gained was internal and personal. That ownership gave it strength. Learning shifted from something received to something lived. Demonstration carries a clarity that words often struggle to achieve. Explanations rely on language, interpretation, and memory, all of which can introduce gaps. Bruce Lee understood that movement communicates directly and without distortion. When something is shown rather than described, the mind absorbs it as a whole. Timing, intention, and efficiency appear simultaneously. Understanding arrives before analysis begins. Words require translation, but action does not. A verbal explanation must be processed, imagined, and then attempted. A demonstration removes those steps. Bruce Lee favored this immediacy because it reduced confusion. What was seen could be felt and understood instantly. Observation became the shortest path to clarity. A single demonstration reveals layers that explanation often separates. Timing is seen in relation to movement, not as an abstract concept. Efficiency becomes visible through economy of motion. Intention shows itself in posture and focus. Bruce Lee used demonstration to present these elements together. Learning became integrated rather than fragmented. Explanation can overload the learner with detail. Too many words can distract from what truly matters. Bruce Lee avoided this by letting action speak. In one clear movement, the essential lesson became obvious. Complexity dissolved into simplicity. Understanding formed without mental clutter. Observation encourages awareness rather than memorization. When learners watch closely, they notice relationships between movement and outcome. Bruce Lee relied on this natural awareness. He trusted that the observer's mind would connect cause and effect. Demonstration invited attention rather than obedience. Action also removes ambiguity. Words can be interpreted differently depending on experience. A demonstration shows exactly what is meant. Bruce Lee valued this precision. By demonstrating, he eliminated guesswork. The lesson arrived intact. Demonstration respects the learner's intelligence. It does not assume the need for constant instruction. Bruce Lee allowed observation to do the teaching. This approach trusted that understanding would emerge naturally. Respect became part of the lesson itself. Timing is difficult to explain but easy to show. A moment of movement can convey when and how far more clearly than description. Bruce Lee recognized this limitation of language. Demonstration captured timing in real context. Learning became immediate and accurate. Efficiency is also best understood visually. Seeing unnecessary motion eliminated reveals what matters. Bruce Lee's demonstrations showed how little movement was required. This visual economy clarified purpose. The lesson became obvious without explanation. Intention is often lost in words but clear in action. The way a movement begins and ends communicates. Focus. Bruce Lee demonstrated intention through precision. Observers could sense commitment and control instantly. Understanding went beyond technique. Demonstration shortens the distance between learning and application. What is seen can be attempted immediately. Bruce Lee favored this efficiency. Learning moved directly into practice. The gap between theory and action disappeared. Explanation often requires repetition to be retained. Demonstration imprints itself quickly. Bruce Lee used this advantage to create lasting impressions. One clear example stayed longer than many instructions. Memory anchored itself to experience. Observation also allows learners to discover details independently. Bruce Lee knew that discovery strengthens retention. Demonstration provided the material and observation completed the lesson. Understanding became active rather than passive. Action condenses information into moments. What might take minutes to explain can be understood in seconds. Bruce Lee valued this compression. It respected time and attention. Learning became sharp and focused. Demonstration outweighs explanation because it communicates truth directly. Bruce Lee's approach showed that clarity often arrives through seeing rather than hearing. Action delivered understanding without delay. In those moments, learning became immediate, complete, and lasting. Silence has a unique ability to focus attention in ways that constant instruction cannot. When words stop, the mind becomes more alert to what is happening in front of it. Bruce Lee understood that speaking too much can dilute awareness rather than enhance it. By choosing silence, he removed unnecessary guidance and allowed the moment to stand on its own. Attention shifted naturally toward movement, timing, and result. Learning began through observation rather than instruction. Words often compete for attention, pulling focus away from what truly matters. Silence removes that competition. In the absence of commentary, the learner must engage fully with what is unfolding. Bruce Lee used silence to eliminate distraction. The eyes sharpened, the mind slowed, and perception deepened. Awareness replaced explanation as the primary guide. Silence encourages responsibility in learning. Without verbal direction, the learner cannot rely on instructions to guide every step. Bruce Lee allowed this responsibility to rest with the observer. This shift empowered the learner to notice details independently. Learning became active rather than passive. Responsibility strengthened understanding. When silence fills a moment, outcomes become clearer. Without words shaping interpretation, cause and effect stand exposed. Bruce Lee recognized that this clarity was valuable. The learner could see what worked and what did not. Without explanation, reality delivered feedback directly. Silence allowed truth to remain unfiltered. Distraction often comes from excess information. Too many words can obscure the essential lesson. Bruce Lee reduced information by withholding speech. This reduction sharpened focus. What remained was movement, response, and result. Learning simplified itself naturally. Silence also creates space for reflection. Without immediate explanation, the mind begins to ask questions. Why did that movement succeed or fail? What changed the outcome? Bruce Lee trusted this internal dialogue. Reflection deepened insight beyond what instruction alone could offer. In quiet moments, awareness expands. The learner becomes more sensitive to subtle changes in posture, timing, and balance. Bruce Lee understood that these subtleties are difficult to explain verbally. Silence allowed them to be noticed directly. Observation replaced description. Teaching through silence requires confidence. It means trusting both the lesson and the learner. Bruce Lee demonstrated this confidence by stepping back. He allowed learning to emerge without intervention. This restraint reflected mastery in teaching as much as in practice. Silence also slows the pace of interaction. It prevents rushed conclusions and impulsive reactions. Bruce Lee valued this slowing effect. It gave the learner time to process what was seen. Understanding unfolded gradually, rather than being imposed quickly. When words are absent, the learner becomes more present. Attention is no longer divided between listening and watching. Bruce Lee used silence to unify focus. The entire moment became the lesson. Presence intensified comprehension. Silence can also heighten memory. Experiences absorbed without explanation often leave stronger impressions. Bruce Lee relied on this effect. The quiet moment stayed with the learner longer because it was experienced fully. Memory anchored itself to observation. In many cases, silence reveals more than speech. It exposes habits, reactions, and assumptions without commentary. Bruce Lee allowed these elements to surface naturally. The learner could see themselves clearly. This self-awareness became part of the lesson. Silence removes hierarchy from teaching. Without constant verbal control, learning feels shared rather than directed. Bruce Lee created this balance intentionally. It fostered respect and engagement. The learner felt trusted rather than instructed. Teaching through silence also respects individual learning styles. Each person observes and interprets differently. Bruce Lee allowed room for this individuality. Silence accommodated diverse understanding. Learning became personal rather than standardized. Silence can be a powerful teaching tool because it directs attention to reality itself. Bruce Lee understood that words are not always necessary for understanding. In quiet spaces, awareness sharpens and learning deepens. Sometimes silence teaches more clearly than words ever could. True instruction begins with the belief that the student is capable of understanding, not merely copying. Bruce Lee approached teaching with this belief firmly in place. He did not assume that learning required constant correction or supervision. Instead, he recognized intelligence as something to be engaged, not overridden. This approach shifted the dynamic from authority to collaboration. Learning became a shared process rather than a one-sided transfer. When a teacher assumes a student lacks understanding, instruction often becomes restrictive. Every movement is corrected, every mistake interrupted. Bruce Lee avoided this pattern by granting space. He treated Gary Elms as someone who could observe, reflect, and reach insight on his own. This trust created an environment where thinking was encouraged. Respect laid the foundation for deeper learning. Respect elevates instruction because it changes how lessons are received. When a student feels trusted, attention sharpens naturally. Bruce Lee's restraint communicated confidence in the learner's capacity. That confidence invited responsibility. Responsibility in turn strengthened engagement with the lesson. Correcting too aggressively can shrink curiosity. It teaches compliance instead of understanding. Bruce Lee understood that intelligence thrives when it is challenged, not controlled. By allowing Gary Elms room to interpret the moment, he activated critical thinking. The lesson became something to uncover, rather than something to accept. This shift made learning active and lasting. Trusting a student's intelligence also encourages independence. Bruce Lee did not want learners who depended on constant guidance. He valued thinkers who could adapt beyond instruction. By stepping back, he signaled that understanding was within reach. This encouragement accelerated growth by fostering self-reliance. Respect changes how mistakes are perceived. Instead of being failures to correct, they become information to examine. Bruce Lee allowed this perspective to exist by not intervening prematurely. The learner could see cause and effect clearly. Learning became exploratory rather than defensive. Instruction that respects intelligence invites deeper questions. When students are trusted, they feel safe to reflect honestly. Bruce Lee's approach created this safety. It removed fear of correction and replaced it with curiosity. Curiosity opened the door to insight. Respect also preserves dignity in the learning process. Being treated as capable reinforces confidence. Bruce Lee's manner showed that he valued the learner's ability to understand complex ideas. This valuation strengthened motivation. Learning accelerated because confidence supported effort. Teachers who respect intelligence focus on timing rather than control. Bruce Lee waited for understanding to surface before intervening. This patience required discipline and awareness. It ensured that instruction complemented discovery instead of replacing it. Teaching became responsive rather than prescriptive. When respect is present, communication becomes subtle and precise. There is no need for excessive explanation. Bruce Lee relied on minimal guidance because he trusted perception. The learner's intelligence filled the gaps naturally. Learning felt earned rather than delivered. Respect also models how the student should approach learning independently. Bruce Lee demonstrated that insight comes from observation and reflection. By respecting intelligence, he encouraged the same respect toward oneself. Self-trust became part of the lesson. Instruction rooted in respect adapts to the learner's pace. Bruce Lee did not force understanding prematurely. He allowed comprehension to develop naturally. This adaptability kept learning aligned with readiness. Growth remained steady rather than rushed. When a teacher trusts intelligence, mistakes lose their stigma. They become part of the process rather than obstacles. Bruce Lee's approach allowed this openness. The learner could engage fully without fear of judgment. This freedom deepened understanding. Respect transforms teaching into mentorship. Bruce Lee guided without dominating. He recognized potential rather than deficiencies. This recognition empowered the learner. Growth accelerated because encouragement replaced correction. True instruction respects the student's intelligence, because respect unlocks potential. Bruce Lee's trust elevated the lesson beyond technique. Learning became thoughtful, independent, and enduring. Respect was not separate from instruction. It was the instruction itself. This moment showed that teaching is not about control, correction, or authority, but about trust. By allowing understanding to form naturally, Bruce Lee demonstrated respect for the learner's ability to think, observe, and grow independently. That respect transformed instruction into insight and guidance into realization. When intelligence is trusted, learning deepens, confidence strengthens, and growth accelerates quietly but permanently. In the end, the most effective teaching does not impose knowledge. It creates the conditions for it to emerge.